All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the only coast to coast radio show that's all about the information economy. It's Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here. And folks, we're going to be talking about the second oldest profession in the world, products, selling stuff at scale with a very interesting company that I frankly haven't heard about before until today, but I love the business model. We're going to talk to Neil Twa. The company is Voltage. They are an incubator, they are an ideation company, but they also buy the companies that they incubate. So they're really good at products, at selling products, and of course, mapping into the incredible world of Amazon. Amazon, which has taken over the world in many ways and really revolutionized how we buy products. I know for sure because my wife buys lots of things on Amazon. I see it in the bill. Amazon, Amazon, Amazon. Lots of people buying stuff on Amazon. And of course, those folks did a tremendous pivot themselves. They started off selling books, realized they were really good at creating inventories and warehouses and delivering things on time, and said, hey, let's expand out to some other products. Now they sell basically everything. And with that, let me bring in Neil Twa of Voltage. Neil, first of all, just tell us a quick background on the company, if I got it right, and what you folks are doing.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Eric. In simple terms, as an incubator, we build and we launch products into physical products and brands that we create. We leverage Amazon's Fulfilled by Amazon system, which you mentioned a lot of people probably buy from Amazon here and don't realize that 60% of the products they buy come from third-party sellers like us. And so we leverage that to move a new brand in. We find out if 49% of the e-commerce market online wants that product through Amazon. And then we'll omni-channel it into other places beyond Amazon to create what we call a holistic e-commerce company. That is a company with multiple sales channels and brand growth. And as we launch that, then we look to scale that business in 3 to 5 years through multiple channels, additional product line, and stronger branding and marketing. And then as we consider the exit, which is worth more in the end than at any time during the business building phase, we look at the opportunity that everything we've built from the beginning is a saleable asset in the end. And
Hmm.
as the individuals who look to acquire those companies, as I help those business builders become, from aspiring entrepreneurs to hard charging people to high income W-2 employees who want to get out and create that opportunity, I help them with an owner operator, process over 3 to 5 years to build that and exit so that I can look at acquiring that company with our private equity group.
Hmm.
We're out buying up companies. We're doing the due diligence process, which takes a long time. And you got to kiss a lot of frogs to find some princes, which sounds really gay when I say it like that. No offense to anybody. I'm married for 18 years. I've got 4 daughters. Long story short, we look to buy those companies when they mature. And so I have just two paths to doing that. And the operators that I work with over those 2, 3, 5 years, they become product partners at times with us in new ventures. We will operate brands together that we control. We have nine different brands, and soon to be 12 that we control within our infrastructure and within Voltage directly owned in-house brands. And then we have at least another 12 that we indirectly control through our operations. And then I help those operators have an opportunity to partner and grow with us as we acquire companies. They help us operate, so we go and train them up in our business model, and then we partner with them later on.
Yeah, that is a fascinating business model, I have to say. And I know a fair amount about what it takes to use Amazon to sell your products. It's a
Yeah.
fairly Byzantine system. So if you really know what you're doing there, you can get that up and running quickly. But the other side of the equation here that I'm just dying to dive into with you is the ad tech side of these
Yeah.
things, right? Understanding who's asking for what, how to align what's being requested in the marketplace with what you can deliver. Of course, we have all sorts of curious supply chain issues and have had those now for years. I remind people that, the tariffs obviously are a bit of a disruption to supply chain, but we saw that, what, how many years ago? 7 years ago or
Yes.
so?
Very big disruption in supply chain.
Very big disruption 7 years ago when the
Yeah.
first presidency of the guy who's now president. So that was a real big warning shot. And then, of course, we had COVID,
Yep.
which shut down supply lines tremendously. And my
Yes.
background is all in the AI space and machine learning and analytics, supply chain, for example, technologies. Let me
Mm-hmm.
tell you, AI machine learning can play a tremendous role in managing supply chains.
100% it can.
So how much of your service offering revolves around expertise of the Amazon platform, but also expertise around how to determine market trends, how to analyze data to know what people want, and then how to map ad campaigns to all that?
Well, it's actually both. And let me explain what I mean by that, going back in the Wayback Machine for a second. When I was working at IBM up until 2007, we were doing AI-driven machine language learning knowledge bases and building the frameworks that have become the large language models of 20 plus years ago. And in
Mhm.
that process, we were working with part of the Watson supercomputing group out of Armonk, where they put that and push out the 18,000 patents. And they were already working with 40% accuracy on predicting through the language modeling what a customer would need or want when they were calling in for support. We were specifically aiming it at the support service industry at that point to help reduce the amount of call volume every month in certain places like mobile and other high-tech industries. And so we were, 40% accurate that we could predict what that person needed or wanted. And that was 20 years ago. So the foundation of AI is just the tip of the iceberg. And as I understand it enough and have learned about it, I see the systems of growth since then. I see Amazon and TikTok and social media platforms and all of that pushing these AI-driven algorithms for data consumption, analysis, mixing everything up in their spaghetti. And now with quantum computing chips and stuff operating the back end, you've got NVIDIA pushing out huge amounts of GPUs into all these amazing infrastructures. What you see is literally a tsunami of coming intelligence that no one has fully recognized yet. Just in 2 years, we've watched, the video side of AI be disrupted immensely, and just within 24 hours, we saw Google launch their Flow VO3, which is incredible, matching now with AI. Graphics technology, the voices, even singing. It's just, if you haven't checked it out, it's quite fascinating and quite scary at the same time, what they're
Yeah.
doing with that and this push to hyperrealism. But the intelligence side, back to that for a second, we use that. And since I learned about it and understood it, we've developed programs and systems to deal with infrastructure, the marketing, answering the question, what the heck do I sell? Gathering that intelligence and data in our own systems for years, and then developing software against it for our internal use to help us
Hmm.
become, faster and easier at identifying those products. Within about 3 years, last 3 years or so, Amazon gave us some access to intelligence data in a particular area within their interface called the Product Opportunity Explorer. And with that, we were able to see more data into Amazon than we've ever been able to see in the last 12 years. So we
Wow.
built part of our intelligence engine off of that using AI agents and trained agents against all of our data. We went out and started to massage that data. And with what's called Cosmo, their AI ranking engine, and its feeding engine of information called Rufus, which basically helps to structure the interest and customer needs and intent. And then it gives it the Cosmo and helps re-rank products in Amazon depending upon what the customers need. We
Hmm.
found the 103,000 needs that make up all of Amazon's 650 plus $1 billion in sales. So I can tell you exactly in
Hmm.
that data in my system now which products sell, where they're selling, and exactly which ones are making up that existing demand. And we've built a list of those products and we're just basically launching them.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty
'Cause-
fascinating data, and we just stumbled on it only about 6 months ago because I had my 15-year-old daughter involved in some of the data stuff because she's very good at it, and she was poring over spreadsheets of data, which sounds boring for most people, but my 15-year-old needed to do this. We homeschool our 4 daughters, and she has so much
Wow.
time and brain power. We're like, I'm putting it here. So she was working with my partner, playing with this data, and she says, "Here's a problem. I can't put these two things together."
Hmm.
And, it's a sign of intelligence just to realize there's a disconnect between two disparate objects. And she recognized it and said, "Here, take a look at this." And it pretty much changed the entire way we looked at our data, which was crazy. And it's just a simple little thing. And she stumbled on it in the process of looking at some of the data we asked her to look at.
Wow.
Long
You
story
guys
short, we had to
are
go back and reprogram the intelligence engine. And with that, we basically discovered exactly what those items were. So
like,
we used to conditionally go through a process of determining what the heck do I sell by looking at your circle of confidence and then analyzing and deducing through different, what we call our green light process, where those products and how they live, because we couldn't get Amazon's intelligence. And I'm not smart enough to tell the market what it wants, right? This is an Elon Musk style stuff here. It is, what does the market need, and can I discover what it needs and then give it what it wants? And that's 99% of innovation. It's not invention, right? So long story short, we found that data and it's right in front of us, and we now know exactly what those products are and which ones to target within our brands. And so now I can literally just go in and tell people in the software, go here, use this top level word, and then just filter down to which exactly are the products, target the one that has the green lights that says go, and launch that product.
that's pretty funny. Do you by chance, this is a bit of a curveball question, do you
Mm.
remember a company, a technology called Endeca that was
I
bought by
can't
Oracle?
remember. No, I don't remember, huh?
Okay, so what you're describing is kind of what Endeca did. They were
Oh,
really
okay.
good for products. management and understanding which products are where and what's hot. Oracle
So
taught.
critical. Biggest piece of the whole thing. Once you discover that and you determine that it's profitable and you've manufactured a process to go and make sure the suppliers and manufacturers can meet that requirements and you can negotiate from a position of power because, well, I needed to be this exact cost. And if you
Right,
can't match that, I find another vendor because I
right.
know the product data is good. I know the market wants that product. I just have to match my brand against it. So I can then create a new brand no one's ever heard of. I can
Wow.
go in, not marrying the product because there's millions of those opportunities. I just want to prove that I can sell that product in the system because sales fixes everything. And then I want to make sure I create a good product. That's the second thing, not the first thing, because really it's just
Sales
about the product
fixes
data,
everything.
Eric. All we're talking about is data. Because at this point, no one has even got the product. And when you order a product on Amazon, how long does it take to get to your house? Right? It takes a day, maybe two. Maybe you can go get it in a locker box in an hour. But the thing is, you didn't actually buy the product you had in your hand. You didn't go to a showroom necessarily and touch it and be like, this is the one I want, send it to my house. You believed it was going to solve the problems or opportunities that you thought it would solve, make you run faster, jump higher, lose weight, gain weight, look better, dye your hair, whatever it was. And you bought it on that understanding. You bought it on a faith-based understanding that when it shows up, it's going to do what you provided. So what am I actually doing? I'm not selling products. I'm selling data to AI engines,
Wow.
right? The AI engines are fulfilling the products to the customers because that's their job. Find the right customer just in time, 30 seconds or less, and give them that product based on the belief, okay, that this engine has told you that this is the customer who wants that product in 30 seconds, and that's my job is to match them up as fast as possible. So I don't marry my products. I marry the brands, right?
Thing.
Big difference in the way people think about physical products, right? Because everybody else is like, well, I got to engineer this super duper product. Well, I've been an inventor and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars inventing amazing technology no one's ever going to hear about.
Mhm.
Right? That's a lot of work and a lot of effort. And what I discovered was literally at 4 a.m. one morning, feeding my third daughter a bottle, and my wife is extremely tired. We had four kids in 5 years.
Wow.
And so I'm feeding her, and it up pops this infomercial, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, well, there's demand for that product. I might buy one for my kids. It was a belt buddy product, or what's called a seat pet, and it had his eyes, and it looked really cool, and it goes over the belt, and it's when the kids, put their head on it, and they can put their crowns in there, whatever. And it dawned on me I could sell one of those. And what I recognized was that demand already exists. There's 49% market share that Amazon currently has to meet that demand. At 700 billion, I don't have to be the inventor. I just have to get in front of it.
Yeah. I think what is so fascinating here is that you have strategically positioned yourself in between two remarkable forces, one pulling, one pushing,
Yes,
basically. And it is, the pull is products that people want to buy, the push is companies that want to sell products. And you have aligned with Amazon, which is the 800-pound gorilla in the industry. Let's just
it's
be honest
huge.
here.
Yep.
But you've built out not only technology, but a methodology and an ability to train people how to use these things. So you're teaching all of your companies how to fish, is what you're
Pretty
doing.
much. I built up an operator whose job is to become a CEO. They
Hmm.
could be an aspiring person. They could be somebody already in the market, and they are, usually they're individuals who have a different thought process in the way they think about business. They think in usually high income earners in different places. They've been in life for a while. They're usually realizing that the current structure of their life, their business, their work ethic, their 70 hours a week or whatever it is, and while they're earning, 100, 250,000 and 300,000 a year, they're spending all that time away from their family, and they don't want their family to inherit that process. They
Right.
want to build something. They look at alternatives to wealth without Wall Street. They don't just invest, they're active in what they do, and they see opportunity and potential. And when they, as they say, when the student is ready, the mentor will appear. And I'm just
Yeah.
appearing for the right people at the right time and saying, well, look, I'm going to train you to become a CEO operator. You're more powerful in that process and system because later on, if you do a great job with that, there's things we can partner on. There's businesses we could acquire together. There's businesses we can exit together. There's opportunity from you to go, from your hell island, your 80 hours a week in this, even if you got a lot of money and not spend a lot of time with your family. I consider that hell island because I spend every day with my family.
Yeah.
Is something that I can help you bridge that gap to Heaven Island. If you want out of that, if you want a process, you want a path, you want a purpose. That's one of the reasons why I get them involved. And quite honestly, I don't get a lot of people involved because I'm very busy running my own companies. So since 2019, when I started that process with helping individuals become operators, specifically. It was the intent of getting them into an actual operating business role. I don't sell courses and programs. I don't believe in any of that kind of crap. What I do is empower people to empower themselves and give them a purpose because it's a win-win scenario. And when they
Yeah.
do a great job, there's a business that I can potentially acquire. And we have what's called first rights of refusal, which means that there's no hard and fast agreement. There's an opportunity that in 3 to 5 years, when that business is matured and it's reached to certain profitability, that you come to me and say, "Hey, Neil, I want to exit this business. Would you be willing to buy it?" And I'm going to take a look at it. I'm going to go to my private equity group, and they usually almost always say yes when I say we need to buy this company.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. And you're the other really cool thing I see here with this company with Voltage and your approach is that you are providing a rather dynamic stepping stone out of the old way of doing product sales
Yes.
into the new way
Hmm.
of product sales, which is very dynamic. It is very data driven, and you
It
literally
is
have
extremely data
sensors.
driven, right?
You
One operator can operate 6 companies because all of our systems, AI systems, PPC systems for product marketing management are AI driven. The inventory and logistics side is now driven by AI. So you have one basic operator that learns how to run a dashboard of blinky lights that has systems and movement and AI tracking and AI management of systems that are managing two technologies together, which you can't put a human between anymore because there's just two systems fighting it out and you can't fight that battle, right? So
That's
you've
right.
got to be able to fight at that level. And I can have one operator run 6 companies and multi 7 figures because of that reason, because it's all literally logistics and they become dashboard operators like flight controllers, letting the planes come in and go out and take off and the products getting moved across logistics and freight and supply chain. And while we have a small little warehouse in Idaho, we use all of that existing infrastructure, last mile customer delivery, which means that we can do that anywhere. There's an internet connection, literally.
Wow. Well, folks, I got to tell you, you got to look this guy up online. Neil Twa, Neil. Last name is TWA, just like the airline years ago. TWA, Tiwa. My tell my girlfriend called it Tiwa.
Tiwa. Yeah, I've heard
She
all
said,
kinds
she's
of
like,
things.
what? Get on Tiwa. I'm like, Tiwa, what are you talking about? She meant TWA. I'm like, TWA. Oh,
You're
okay,
right.
the
Like
airline.
the
She called
airline.
it
There you
Tiwa.
go.
Tiwa. I'm like, what are you talking about? The language barriers there. But this is a fascinating business model. We got to talk more with this gentleman. Voltage is the company, and they have created an entity that allows you to build out your business. And while you're building the business, you're learning from all their expertise in data collection, in AI automation of things like supply chain, which is really complex stuff. I mean, the old technologies for doing that stuff are very expensive. They're very difficult. They're very cumbersome. They're very hard to use. And this new stuff, that's the way of the future, folks. Well, don't touch that dial. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh. And my next guest is Georgia Austin. She has founded a company called Word Brew, and boy, has she done some writing. So she was early on the whole Fiverr game, if you're familiar with Fiverr, Fiverr, sort of a freelancing platform. And she cracked the code on that sucker a few years ago during the whole pandemic, and now has built out quite an impressive operation doing copywriting and doing AI facilitated copywriting, but copywriting that leverages the expertise of individuals. So you're not just getting the generic outputs of a large language model. That's what I try to remind people about these LLMs is they are really consensus engines more than anything. So they're going to give you the average of whatever they've been trained upon based upon your prompt. So the average is okay for some use cases, but for creative writing, they're not really creative. They're just reflecting back what they've already seen. So that creativity, that's the kernel around which you can build a story. And with that, let me bring in Georgia Austin of Word Brew. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you got here. That's a very, very cool story.
Yeah, hi Eric. Thank you so much for having me. So great to be here. So everything that has caused WordBrew to come to life all really stemmed from my experience on a platform called Fiverr, which you just mentioned. And so really I found out about Fiverr through something as simple as a TikTok video that I watched
Hmm.
during the pandemic.
All
So
right.
not long before, I actually was working as a full-time copywriter in London, and I was freelancing for a couple of clients towards the end of my tenure there, which was really my ticket to say, hey, maybe I can actually make this thing a full-time role. So I ended up leaving my job at the end of the year and then moved to Brazil kind of on a whim a couple of months later. And of
Hmm.
course, I unknowingly did this as the pandemic happened and everything went digital, everything went online. The world changed. And I, again, came across that Fiverr video. I created a profile, not expecting anything to come of it. And I ended up getting my first project within the first 2 days. And so,
Hmm.
really, from there, it was my chance to kind of ride that wave. And I basically had this motto to just accept every single job. And so that's exactly what I did. I did not turn any work down, did everything by myself for the first couple of months. Definitely burnt out, 14, 15-hour days. I was the writer, the customer support specialist, the dispute analyst. I was everything all in one. And so really, really took a toll on me. And that was my opportunity to expand. So I brought on some operations folks, and then alongside that, I onboarded industry specialist content writers who were much better at me at writing about that particular industry and, of course, had more passion. And that, in my opinion, really shone through in the content that we created in this pre-AI world.
Yeah.
And so that was really kind of the way that WordBrew started. Not long after that, I created WordBrew the agency as kind of a replica of my Fiverr offerings, my agency on Fiverr. And then all of that kind of spun into where we're at today, which is WordBrew, the software platform. So all of these things, the software platform, the agency, and also the agency on Fiverr are still happening today. But there were a ton of learnings that we took from the Fiverr and the WordBrew agency experience. And of course, all of this was happening before AI, during AI, and kind of post this AI kind of hype, if you will. And two of those main problems that we found was that people were just unsatisfied with the generic content they were getting, as you mentioned earlier. And secondly, I found that there was so much incredible subject matter expertise that was trapped within the minds of people. It was siloed within companies. And so I knew that, people have incredible expertise. We now have this amazing technology to kind of improve the efficiency of how we extract that and turn it into something useful. And that was really where WordBrew, the platform, came to life.
Yeah, well, you might appreciate this. I'm a big fan of philosophy, both Eastern and Western philosophy. And in the East, you've got Lao Tzu and Sun Tzu, and of course, Confucius and Buddha, and all this cast of characters over the years. And Sun Tzu he has lots of great pithy quotes. One of my favorites that you seem to have appreciated was opportunities multiply when seized. Right?
I
So
love
it's like if
that.
you take the business and keep doing the business, you'll get more business and more opportunities. In fact, there's an old expression in English you may have heard where it says, if you want something done, give it to the busiest person in the office. So the idea is don't give it to the person doing nothing, give it to the person doing everything, and they're going to find a way to get that done because they're on a roll. So that
Mm.
seems to be a perfect reflection of what you have done with WordBrew and with this whole business model, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about opportunistic quotes, one of my other favorite quotes is that if opportunity doesn't knock, build a door. And so I, obviously believe that you can have the perfect circumstances. And, in my case, I was really lucky to have created an account on Fiverr at that time, which catapulted into everything that has happened and is happening today. So I'm super grateful for that. But I also believe that opportunity can be forged. And so it's something I also try to remind myself.
Well, there's another ancient bit of wisdom that says luck is when opportunity meets preparation,
I
right?
love
And that
that.
that goes back a long, long. That's like the ancients had a bunch of wisdom, and a lot of it was captured. In fact, I have a British business partner. He's mostly retired now, but he just says very clever things. And one day we were talking about cliches and how much I love cliches, and he referred to them as the wisdom they couldn't kill. And I was like, oh man, that's crazy. Like, why would anyone want to kill wisdom? Well, there are various reasons why people in power want to stay in power. And so, not always do you see this celebration of learning and wisdom and sharing. But that's where we are these days. I mean, we're in a very strange place now, especially for creators, when engines can spin up copy or spin up videos or spin up music. I mean, what are we supposed to do? I think the real message here is that this is a new horse to ride, and you have to figure out how to ride that horse and how to leverage that horse. But what I've seen with Gen AI, and I mentioned it at the top of the hour here, it's going to be generic. It's going to be in a very certain format and style. And if everything sounds the same, you don't notice. I mean, this is what I've learned in the world of marketing is that if you have to get someone's attention, you have to do something different, whatever it is. Maybe it's the headline or it's the article, it's the content, it's the method, whatever it is, you have to try different things, even the different time of day to send out your email blast, for example. So I don't think there's going to be any end to the human involvement in these routines, in this creative process, but you do want to figure out what these engines can do for you and how to leverage it and how to sort of align your creative spirit with them. What do you think?
I agree. And truly, it is ultimately all about collaboration. And something I tell people and also myself is AI is an incredible tool and it's incredibly powerful, but it can't replace your thinking, your lived experiences. And
Right.
those things are never going to go away. So even if AI continues to advance, I mean, humans aren't just going to become obsolete. It might wipe out some jobs, sure, but our lived experiences, our opinions, and general knowledge on everything that we kind of do is never going to go away. So it really is all about collaboration and really finding that balance between kind of knowledge and AI and using AI as an efficiency tool, something to help with strategy or to kind of get you across the finish line or even just improve the process and speed that up from start to
Hmm.
finish, but never as a replacement for your thinking. And that's really the premise behind WordBrew is how can we reimagine this relationship between humans and AI and build this really seamless workflow tool that takes you from collecting expert insights, whether internally from the people in your team or if you, the user, simply do something like recording a voice memo, and then actually turning that into unique and authoritative content. Because once again, AI will just give you a generic output, garbage in, garbage out. So really just
Hmm.
take that extra few minutes to collect that unique data, those insights, those POVs, the hills you're willing to die on. And then that's truly, truly something that makes such a difference maker when using AI.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned something earlier, I think it was before we hit the record button, or maybe it was just after, about passion and the importance of passion, because passion is life, passion is energy. And when we're talking, we're exchanging energy, is what we're really doing. I mean, there are ideas behind the words that are pushing forward a conversation, but passion, it rings true, right?
Yes, it does. Passion is something that I've always been very lucky to have. I'm somebody that I consider myself to be very tenacious, very passionate about what I do. I'm all in or nothing. And again, even I mentioned this at the start of the call. Um, this was one of the big reasons why I decided to hire other industry specialist writers, not just
Hmm.
because they had the technical expertise in that field, but because they would also truly enjoy writing about it. I mean, why else would you be a specialist in that space? And so that was
Right.
really important for me. And again, it really shone through in the content and really helped propel our growth as a company.
Well, and that's very interesting too. And I'll just throw something else out that I think you'll appreciate, which is that I've always been a huge fan of trade press. And trade press, you don't even hear the term anymore because it's kind of fallen away to a large extent because they were all print magazines. And the print world, of course, it's not dead, but it kind of might as well be. It's very, very difficult now to publish articles in printed magazines. I mean, who's going to read them? Who's got the money to invest to deliver them, distribute? It's very expensive. So, but I love trade press because it goes deep. And you have like consumer media is fairly shallow. Who is Taylor Swift dating these days? That kind of thing. And that's interesting for some people. But if you're a business person, then you need really deep, meaningful content. You need someone who understands your industry, the nuances, the history, the market forces, whatever is happening. And there, the bottom line is that people who specialize in these niches, they know a lot. And even if you can learn a lot quickly using AI, you don't really know it. You've read about it, you sort of understand conceptually, but when you've been in that industry and when you've been in that business at the coal face, as my British friends would say, then you have a deep experience that can be leveraged, but it has to be brought out. And that's the value of conversation and of content, right?
Yeah, exactly. And again, just thinking about how we can really tap into our knowledge and expertise in this whole other way now that we have AI at our fingertips, right? And something
Mhm.
I always talk about, always talk about this to my clients, is that you don't have to be a writer to create content anymore, right? You can literally just take your insights and your knowledge, even if they're way too technical, even if they are said in broken English, you can share that in any format with AI, whether it's written text, whether it's a voice
Right.
memo, and AI
Right.
will literally turn that into something cohesive, on brand. And again, these are all the kinds of things that WordBrew supports and helps with.
That's very interesting. So WordBrew, we got about 3 minutes left here. WordBrew, the agency, and then there's this software platform that you're building out, which sounds like a mixture of workflow automation and content creation. And, let's face it, workflow is really, really important, and having good tools that can optimize the flow is very important because you're in a creative business. And creativity, I often joke, really leans on the muse. Like it's up to the muse to give you the creativity, and that this is an old theory, but it's one to which I subscribe because I'm a creator myself, and I know you have to be inspired to create good stuff. And so there are different techniques people do to sit around, watch movies, read books, think, do whatever you want, to take a walk, or lie down in bed. That's when I get my best ideas. So I have to get up and type them out. But just tell us real quickly the agency itself and then the automation platform, how do these two things dovetail?
Yeah, no, 100%. And just to clarify, like I wouldn't say that WordBrew is like 100% an automation tool. There is automative elements within the platform to improve efficiency and all those kinds of things. But we do also make it very clear that WordBrew, the software, is like a tool that provides the means to turn expertise into content, but it's
Hmm,
never something we describe as a one-click wonder content creation tool, right? You've got the
sure.
Jaspers of the world, you've got the Chat GPTs of the world, and all these other AI models, but we really just want to get you to a great starting point. So, of course, content is subjective to everybody. I might look at a draft created in WordBrew and think it's 70% of the way there. Somebody else might say 90% or even 100%, whatever. But we really
Mhm.
just want to get you to a great starting point that gives you a first draft that is unique and based off your unique data and insights. So that's really the premise of WordBrew, the software platform. And the agency is truly just a non-productized version of that because the agency kind of hybrid content creation method was a big inspiration of the current WordBrew content creation method as a software. It all really stemmed from our agency learnings.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic because agencies are high energy, great expectations, a lot of pressure to get things right, and finding the right clients is always important. I bet you've learned what I learned years ago that bad clients are no bueno,
Oh,
right?
yes, that's
You
right.
want you want the good clients, nurture the good clients, take care of your tip jar, work with them. If you get a bad client, just say adios. Am I right?
Oh, you are 100% right. And it also it's true when, you have there's like a stereotype, right? It's the people who want to pay pennies, the ones that cause the most drama and the people who pay the most amount of money. Sure, they might ask you a few more qualifying questions in your sales calls, but they are beyond easy, typically beyond easy to deal with once you're actually in that relationship.
That's what we want. We want easy and fun and creative and dynamic. Well, folks, you got to look this lady up online. Georgia Austin, just like the name sounds. Wordbrew.com is the website. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, a fascinating show so far. We're talking all about new business models, new ways of doing things. And boy, has the world changed in the last few years. And our next guest is a gentleman, Matthew Walls, with a company called the Jenny Project. And they have taken AI to a really remarkable extreme. They allow you to test ideas and basically get a panel of consumers that are AI generated to give you feedback on your ideas and what you're working on. And I think this is just absolutely fascinating. It actually dovetails with something I predicted at the end of last year, which is that sooner or later, at least in civil court, I predict you're going to be allowed to go for either an AI judge and jury or a real judge and jury. And I would recommend if you're innocent, go with the AI judge and jury. And if you're guilty, go with the real judge and jury. Because I think people are going to have a harder time lying to machines than they do to people. It's just a personal theory that I have. But with that intro, Matthew Walls, the Jenny Project, tell us first of all, where did it come from? And then what does it do and how does it work?
Yeah, that's a great theory. Interesting idea. Yeah, so a little bit about the Ginny project and how it originated. I come from academia originally. I spent a handful of years working at General Mills as a data scientist within their consumer and shopper journey, as well as leading data science teams within consumer and market insights. And having my foot in the kind of the academic camp, I kept up to date with literature on large language models and things like that. I did some really early work kind of testing out early versions of I think I don't even remember, it was before GPT-3, but just very simple stuff that doesn't look anything like it does nowadays. That was years ago. Just kept up to date with things like that. And then just my knowledge within consumer and market insights, the consumer journey, building out, using consumer panels to do all sorts of tests to like identify who, what drives your shoppers and things of that nature. Kind of mesh these two worlds together to be able to generate AI lookalike panels of consumers through a variety of, testing and fine tuning and things like that to get them to respond very similar to actual consumers to allow us to test products, test product ideas, test messaging, really augment and enhance a lot of the traditional market research that we do today.
Hmm.
So a lot of it was grounded in like in my time at General Mills. Did a lot of work again with consumer panels, and we would identify things like what demographics are key or important, right, to driving behavior. Is it racial categories, income groups, things like that? And there's a handful of demographics that we found that were essential for everything that we were doing. So I made sure to incorporate things like that where you could iterate and test those various demographics with these AI panels. You can do psychographics and stuff too, like if you wanted to know, at my time at General Mills, if we wanted, to sell a product and these individuals listen to podcasts or something like that, right? If you could identify that as a driver of behavior, increase in serial purchases or things like that, then you could target like marketing with podcasts. So stuff like that kind of carried over to the constructions of these AI panelists that we generate, and then again do something very very similar where we just test various ideas, various concepts, and things of that nature to see how these panelists respond ultimately to whatever question we have in mind.
Yeah, and let's talk about the demographic side of the equation because you talked before the show about how the census has all kinds of information, and I know because I've moved around a lot that personalities are different from place to place. Cincinnati is a different city from Pittsburgh, which is different from Chicago, which is different from New Orleans, Los Angeles, Detroit, Tampa, Miami. I
Yeah.
mean, some of these cities in the South are getting very cosmopolitan because snowbirds are moving down there, and that kind of disrupts things. But talk about like how you can identify the proper demographics to look for based upon the product, based upon the client, and how all that works.
Yeah. So there's a couple approaches to it. So you can, I mean, ultimately, when we're talking about generating these panels, you can get as granular as you want, right? So if you wanted like a specific population in a small city in Alabama, you could generate that panel. The likelihood that they're going to respond like an actual human panel is probably low, right? Because you don't have tons of data on that actual group
Hmm.
itself. We tend to aggregate up a little bit higher. We will do like things like cities that will generate populations of cities because there tends to be a little bit more data there. But yeah, we most of what we do is a gen pop sample just based on a national representation, right? And because we're trying to get to the highest level to increase the accuracy the most of what we do. So it's just identifying, what those the changes in the census data, seeing how things change over time, and being able to appropriately weight the samples that we construct based on the census data. So that's what we do. Again, we can get more granular if you're interested in things like that, but the lower you go, the lower the accuracy is going to be ultimately. So there's always that trade-off. But the unique thing about it is a lot of times people will want some feedback on some of these like small granular audiences. Excuse me. But they've never been able to actually like test them with real humans. So we can still generate some samples and do things like that. Again, low accuracy, we don't know the outcome, but you can get some directional feedback on interesting ideas that you just perhaps can't do with.
Yeah, well, so I mean, getting back to my idea about the civil court system, because it is applicable to what you're talking about. I thought to myself, you're supposed to, according to the Constitution, be allowed a jury of your peers, and so if you are in Pittsburgh area, well, you're going to get a bunch of Steelers fans, you're going to get a few Pirates fans. There is a certain persona to each city,
Yeah.
and if you are trying to target market, well, you want to understand those people. But I'm curious about your comment that the more granular you get, the lower the accuracy in terms of general feedback, right? So ideally, you want to be as diverse as possible to understand. And then are you able to give breakdowns of the feedback based upon demographics? So people in this income level said no, people in that income level said hi. Yes, is that kind of what you see?
Yeah, yeah. So that's how we tend to do things. So an often use case or something that we'll develop is like, there's a brand that's interested in putting out a new product and they just want to get some general feedback and identify who their target audiences are and perhaps test some messaging based off of that. So we'll do some very quick just iterations to identify. We'll ask questions like to this panel that we construct, right? Maybe it's a 500 AI personas that we construct, and we'll ask them how likely are you to purchase this product, or like how likely would you purchase this compared to competitors? So just a series of
Hmm.
questions like that. And then from there, you can take all that information and actually ingest it into another large language model, which will spit out some character profiles and personas that are most likely or resonate most with the product. And it
Hmm.
does it by all those demographic breakdowns, right? So it'll look at like maybe it's high income or high income earners, or maybe it's this type of profession that's interested in something like this, or any demographic that we throw in there, you can break it down ultimately and segment by it to see if there is something unique. And we try to call out some of those unique traits or some of those unique things that stand out because that seems to be what those in the insight space in the market research profession, that's the thing that they're most interested in. What's different about this group that I can pull out from it?
Interesting. Interesting. And then, so I mean, I'm kind of curious to know what went into building out the foundation of this service. So did you build a model to generate individual persona based upon demographics, based upon needs? Like what went into building the scaffolding, if you will, to create this thing?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, there's different levels of complexity, right? So you can start with its most simplest version. If you wanted to, like anybody could go out there and just interact with something like ChatGPT, right? And be like, assume you're, this character, right? Assume you're,
Hmm.
maybe, you've got this background, you're this profession, so on and so forth, and have it act like that. Not the best way to do it, because there's all sorts of things, underlying things that you probably want to address to make them more human. So there's a bunch of
Hmm.
things that we pulled from psychology literature, a lot of behavioral traits and things like that that we ultimately ingest to define the personas. And again, so like that at its most simplest version or the most simplest version that we have, you can just say, we've got some of this qualitative data. We know these behaviors about humans. We know these behaviors specific to demographics and psychographics. We'll ingest that in to each of our personas so they understand that information, then they can act like that persona. You can also like to get more complicated, more complex, you can point these individual personas to data sets, right? So if you've got, if you're interested in like purchasing or not purchasing, if you're interested in building a panel of, those who eat Honey Nut Cheerios or something like that, right? And if you've got panel data on people who've actually purchased Honey Nut Cheerios, you can feed that panel data directly to those consumers. So you'll increase the accuracy to act more like consumers of Honey Nut Cheerios at that point. And you can do fine tuning and all sorts of things to enhance it. But again, it depends on the level of complexity you want to go. It's in its simplest version. Again, you could just generate these personas relatively quickly, but it's not going to always be as accurate as you want it to be. So again, you want to go a little bit more complex to increase that accuracy overall, if that makes
And
sense.
then, yeah, yeah, real quick, our segment break is coming up here in a second, but are you able to then map your suggestions with client results? Like when they say, okay, we worked with you to get these suggestions, are you able to align that and see like how well you score?
Yeah, yeah. So that typically tends to be one of the first steps that we do is alignment. We've replicated something like 58 surveys at this point to see how these human panels align versus these AI panels. The difficulty
Hmm.
being when you do replication studies like that, I'm not even sure if it's good if you match the human panels because there's so many issues with fraud and bias these days in surveys.
That's
Where it's like,
funny.
what are we actually mimicking? I don't fully know.
Right. That's funny.
Yeah,
What are
yeah,
we actually mimicking? This is
yeah.
fascinating. Well, we're going to bring him back after the break here, folks. If you want to be on the show, send me an email, info@insideanalysis.com. That comes straight to me. We're talking to Matthew Walls of the Jenny Project. And it is fascinating stuff. I can't help but think about Blade Runner. More human than human. That's our motto, right? So we'll be right back, folks. You're listening to Inside Analysis. Right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on Inside Analysis. Your host here, Eric Kavanaugh, with Matthew Walls of the Jenny Project. And the Jenny Project is an absolutely fascinating business model where these folks will generate panels of consumers to give you feedback on products or services or new ideas or pretty much whatever you want. And Matthew, I think it's really quite interesting. I'm curious to know, is there some logic behind creating specific persona personae, I guess is the proper plural of that word, and then having them available, or is it better just to kind of spin up people based upon the demand?
Yeah, you could do it. You could do it both ways. We've done it both ways ourselves. We ended up going with the direction of just generating new panels every single time. And in part, the reason we do that is because we're very concerned about introducing any level of bias. And if you
Hmm.
repeat panels, so if you repeat panels, they'll oftentimes, and if they have information about previous questions and things like that, it's potentially problematic and can introduce a level of bias that we just are unaware of. So, like our
Understood.
motto more or less is like one shot, right? You do one shot, you got a question, you generate a panel, ask that question to a panel. You got another question, you just ask it to a whole other panel that will look like your first panel, right? Because again, we base it off of national demographics or national representation of demographics. So it'll look similar
Hmm.
to a previous panel, but it'll be all new responses altogether. So that's
That's
the reason we ultimately went that approach.
That's so well. And are these like, because I've got a friend of mine up here in Pittsburgh, very, very smart guy, who created 5 GPTs. He's got his finance GPT, his marketing GPT, sales, engineering, and operations, I think, are the different versions. And he will
Right.
have them hash out plans. He'll say, hey, I want to do XYZ. What do you all think? Like they'll throw their
Yeah.
thoughts back into this process and then they synthesize it, which I think it's some pretty interesting digital twin simulation activity there. It's quite fascinating. But what are your thoughts on that? Is that kind of what you're doing with the personas that you gin up on demand?
Yeah. So we tend not to have them interact or do anything like that again because we're concerned ultimately with bias. But we have
Hmm.
when we generate like a market research report or something like that, we have multiple agents have interactions with each other to make sure we're producing the best report available. So like for example, if you there's a client that works with us, they'll interact with what we call Virgil, right? Who's kind of our market research strategist. And so he'll help kind
Hmm.
of put together a market research plan. And if you're interested in something like messaging to test messaging or ideas like that, we've got another AI copywriter that we will have interact with Virgil to make sure we're developing a new copy based on the messages that we scrape from their websites. They have these interactions, right, to identify what's the best copy, how do you feed it into a market research strategy. We've got another AI system called Jenny, which then actually produces these AI panels and does all this testing and things. But she'll all interact with Virgil and our AI copywriter to make sure we're feeding the correct questions into Jenny and feeding the correct questions through the panel to make sure we're getting the report that we want. So all these things are going on kind of on the back end, whereas a user, you're just like, hey, I want to understand some target audiences. I want to understand some messaging, and then we handle the rest in that sense. So there is some of that going on on our end, but for the panels themselves, yeah, we make sure they're isolated and there's no interactions amongst them because you will violate some key assumptions for this type of research if they do interact.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So are you a layer on top of existing foundational models? Like, are you using ChatGPT or Claude or those guys, or did you build your own?
Yeah. So we have, or we're sitting on top of, well, right now the primary one or the primary system we use is OpenAI's models. We've tested pretty much everything you can get your hands on in terms of what's going to be the most effective, and that tends to be the one we go with. We would love to build out our own foundational model. We don't have the cash to do something like that at this
Right.
point. We explore like fine tuning and things like that with some of the open source models, but it tends to be the best way for us to go is to use the just the foundational models as is with
Yeah.
additional data that we layer on top of it.
And that's the new trend. I mean, I think it's really quite fascinating what we've seen here. Maybe we'll just kind of close on this. I've talked before on the show about an awareness that I have now. This is really quite fascinating that in the information systems world, the database is the foundation, and we have spent the last 50 years improving how performant databases are for concurrent users, for speed, for size, all sorts of different things. But the one thing that was never in question was accuracy. It was table stakes. You always get out of the database what you put into the database. It's just a question of how fast and how inexpensively you can do that. And now with these models, because they are probabilistic by design, it's almost like you're putting a noise filter on the end of this very long, deterministic, pristine process, which is kind of bizarre. It's like, well, why would we
Yeah.
do that? And the short answer is that there's tremendous power in these engines to do things that we haven't been able to do before. One, of course, yes, is generate content, and that's kind of what you're doing. You're a content generation engine. The content takes the form of opinions from digital persona, right? So what do you
Yeah.
think about that strange inflection point that we've hit, and how do we make sure that we have enough safeguards in place to sort of temper or mitigate any hallucinations or weird things that are going to come out of these generative engines?
Yeah, that's a lot of good points. It's good framing that you put out there. I think in terms of like how do you prevent against hallucinations? Like in part, what we're doing is we're actually asking these large language models to hallucinate, right? Because they're
Right,
they're basically making up stories. So that's an
right.
entirely different
That's funny.
conversation altogether. Yeah. So like the problem of hallucination is an interesting one. I don't know enough about it how to fix something like that, but again, that's not really our primary concern because yeah, because we are more or less in the vein of asking them, okay, just make something up based on this information that you have at hand.
Right,
Yeah, and but that's also why the simulation approach is key, right? And you can't just do it like a lot of people will. Like I've seen a lot of like consumer insights individuals and market researchers use ChatGPT and like try to like identify right if a specific persona will buy a product or if they're interested in a product and things like that. But if you ask it just once, right, it'll give you an answer. It might give you the best answer that it thinks available. But if you ask it 100 times, it'll give you 100 different, slightly different answers, and it will
right,
follow something like a normal distribution ultimately. But that's why I think
right.
the simulation approaches are key because you can use them to make sure you are getting at the central tendency if that's what you want of that distribution. But you can also look at the outliers too to see if there's any information to scrape or gather from that. But like to me, it's always like all these because they are stochastic in nature or probabilistic. You have to take a simulation based approach with when you're interacting with something like this, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Well, and it gets the job done a lot faster is one key, and I'm guessing that you're taking a hard look at the pricing and knowing what it would cost to get an actual panel together, which is not cheap. I mean, it's very
Yeah.
difficult to do that. And to your point, there's bias. You get people intentionally giving wrong answers. I mean, there's all kind of stuff that humans do that the machines won't do. But this is fascinating stuff. Well, folks, look this gentleman up online, Matthew Walls, Walz. The company is the Jenny Project, Jenny Project.com, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Very cool stuff. Congratulations. And like I say, folks, you want to be on the show, send me an email, info@insideanalysis.com. This does conclude another episode. We'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.